Daniel Hawthorne thought he had everything under control: his money, his wife, and his secret affair. But when his accounts mysteriously freeze overnight, his mistress vanishes, and his empire crumbles, he realizes too late that his naive wife had been watching all along. And she just made her final move. The grand estate was silent except for the distant hum of city lights beyond the hills. From the outside, the mansion looked like a place where happiness resided. Towering marble columns, floor-to-ceiling windows, a perfectly manicured lawn stretching for acres. Inside, however, it was nothing more than a carefully orchestrated performance, one Daniel Hawthorne had mastered over the years. Standing in front of the vast glass wall of his study, he swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his reflection distorted against the city skyline. He had built this life from nothing, rising from a background he had long since erased, climbing from an existence he now considered beneath him. Power had come at a cost, but he had paid it gladly. Every decision, every calculated move had brought him here, to this moment where he held all the control. Or at least, that's what he believed. His wife, Eleanor, was seated in the lounge just beyond the open doors of his study, flipping through a book, her posture as composed as ever. She was the embodiment of grace, always poised, always elegant. To the world, she was the perfect wife, supportive, intelligent, but never interfering. She attended charity events, hosted extravagant dinners, and smiled politely at all the right moments. She had been raised in wealth, understood its responsibilities, and never asked too many questions about the intricacies of their financial affairs. That was exactly why Daniel had never worried about the money he had been siphoning from her trust fund. It had started small. A few untraceable withdrawals, insignificant in the grand scheme of things. The fund was vast, an ocean of wealth Eleanor had inherited from her family's empire, and Daniel saw no harm in taking what he needed. After all, it was still within their marriage, wasn't it? It was theirs. And besides, Eleanor never asked about the accounts, never once showed concern over financial matters. She had been raised to let the men handle such things. That was the beauty of it. Her ignorance was his freedom. The first time he took money, it was for something simple. A weekend away, a discreet retreat with Vivian Cross, the woman who had ignited something in him he hadn't felt in years. Excitement. Hunger. A thrill beyond the structured world he lived in. Vivian was younger, sharp-tongued, intoxicating. Unlike Eleanor, she demanded attention, wanted to be spoiled, insisted on living in the kind of luxury only he could provide. And Daniel was happy to oblige. But indulgence always has a price. What started as harmless gifts and secret rendezvous turned into lavish apartments, designer wardrobes, and frequent international getaways. Vivian wasn't content with just being the mistress. She wanted more, demanded more. And Daniel, convinced he could balance it all, continued to fund her lifestyle without a second thought. Eleanor would never know. She was too busy with her charities, her quiet life, too trusting to ever suspect that her husband had been stealing from her. Or so he thought. Eleanor had always noticed the small things. A shift in Daniel's demeanor, the way his eyes lingered on his phone a moment too long, the scent of a different perfume clinging to his clothes when he came home late. She never let on. She played her role, the devoted wife who never pried, who let him believe he had fooled her. But she had known for months. She had seen the transactions, each one carefully documented, each one leading her closer to the truth. The mistake Daniel had made wasn't taking the money. It was assuming Eleanor had no power over it. She had allowed him to think he was in control, let him believe she was nothing more than a passive observer in their marriage. It was almost amusing, watching him carry on as if he were untouchable. He had no idea that every step he took deeper into his betrayal was another step closer to his downfall. One evening, she sat across from him at dinner, sipping her wine as he spoke about an upcoming business trip, another lie, another excuse to be with Vivian. She nodded, smiled, played her part. "You've been working so hard lately," she murmured, setting her glass down. "You deserve some time away." Daniel glanced up, momentarily caught off guard by her words. He had expected questions, perhaps mild concern. Instead, Eleanor was encouraging him, her expression unreadable. "I suppose I do," he said, recovering quickly. "Just a few days. Meetings, mostly." "Of course," she said, tilting her head slightly. watching him the way a predator watches prey before the final strike. The next morning, Daniel made another withdrawal. A larger sum this time, just enough to secure the penthouse Vivian had been eyeing. He barely noticed the slight delay in the transfer, the way the confirmation screen hesitated before approving the request. He didn't know that Eleanor had set traps, that she had been monitoring every transaction, letting him dig himself deeper into the pit of his own making. And still, he went on, oblivious. Later that evening, he arrived at the apartment he had bought for Vivian, his lips already curving into a smirk as he imagined the way she would throw her arms around him, how she would press against him and whisper about how no one had ever treated her this well before. She knew exactly what to say, exactly how to keep him coming back. But tonight, something felt different. Vivian was distant, distracted, her movements sharp instead of fluid. She accepted the glass of champagne he handed her, but barely sipped it. "What's wrong?" Daniel asked, frowning. Vivian hesitated, then exhaled sharply, setting the glass down. "I heard something today," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "A rumor. About you." Daniel smirked. "There are always rumors about me." She shook her head. "Not like this. Someone said your accounts were being looked into." His smirk faltered. "By whom?" She shrugged, but there was something calculating in her eyes, something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "I don't know. Maybe nothing. But you know me. I like to be prepared." Daniel forced a chuckle, running a hand through his hair. "My business is fine. My accounts are fine. Don't listen to rumors." But for the first time in months, a flicker of unease crept into his chest. Back at the estate, Eleanor stood in her private study, the dim glow of her desk lamp illuminating the neatly stacked papers in front of her. Financial statements, legal documents, every single transaction Daniel had made, all carefully documented. She had waited long enough. Tomorrow, the game would begin, and Daniel Hawthorne, the man who thought he had mastered every move, was about to realize he had been playing against a far superior opponent all along. If you were in Eleanor's place, what would you have done? Would you have confronted him right away or waited like she did? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. You won't believe what happens next. The air in the dimly lit penthouse was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, a blend of jasmine and something dangerously intoxicating. Vivian Cross lounged on the edge of the king-sized bed, her long, manicured fingers tracing the rim of a half-empty glass of red wine. She wore silk. She always wore silk, as if the very fabric whispered of luxury against her skin. The city lights shimmered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a golden glow on her as she watched Daniel pace the room, his jaw tight, his mind elsewhere. "You seem tense," she mused, stretching like a cat, her body effortlessly poised in a way that made men forget their logic. Daniel exhaled sharply, running a hand through his dark hair, his usual confidence tainted with something close to irritation. "Work," he said, a clipped response, one he knew would keep her from pressing too hard. He had learned long ago that women like Vivian didn't care about his stress unless it affected their lifestyle. She arched an eyebrow, sipping her wine before setting it aside. "That's all." For a moment, he hesitated. Vivian was perceptive, too perceptive. She had a way of knowing when something was off, even when he hadn't said a word. But he had no intention of admitting that. For the first time in years, a seed of doubt had been planted in his mind. The words she had spoken the night before still clung to him like a stain that refused to wash away. Someone was looking into his accounts. That shouldn't have mattered. He had covered his tracks well, made sure every transfer was discreet, every wire movement untraceable. And yet, something felt different. Vivian watched him, amusement flickering in her dark eyes. She knew how men like Daniel worked. Always so sure of their power, always convinced they were untouchable. That was what made them so easy to manipulate. She slid off the bed, walking toward him with deliberate slowness. "You know," she murmured, running a single finger along the lapel of his blazer. "If something's bothering you, I'd rather you just say it. We don't do secrets, remember?" Daniel smirked, gripping her wrist lightly. "Everyone has secrets, sweetheart." She tilted her head, watching him closely. "Even from me?" He didn't answer, instead capturing her lips with his own, silencing any further probing. It worked for now. Vivian didn't need to push too hard. Not yet. The next morning, Daniel left the penthouse early, slipping into the back seat of his sleek black car, giving his driver a clipped instruction to take him downtown. His phone buzzed against his palm, another alert from his bank. He glanced at the notification, expecting another routine withdrawal confirmation, but his stomach tightened when he read the words. Transaction delayed. Pending authorization. He frowned, refreshing the app. The same message flashed back at him. A minor glitch, surely. A technical delay. But unease stirred in his gut. His accounts never had delays. He paid people to ensure they didn't. As the car wove through the streets, his mind worked through every possibility, every scenario that could explain the sudden interference. He had always been in control, always 3 steps ahead. This was nothing. It had to be. By the time he arrived at his office, he had pushed the thought aside, forcing himself into the mindset that had made him the success he was. He walked through the building with the same commanding presence, his staff parting like waves as he moved toward his private elevator. But beneath the surface, his pulse beat a little too fast. Once inside his office, he dialed his banker directly. "I received a notification about a delay on one of my transactions," he said smoothly, keeping his tone even. "Why?" There was a slight pause. He didn't like pauses. "Mr. Hawthorne," the banker said carefully, "there's been a temporary hold on certain withdrawals due to an internal review." Daniel's fingers tightened around the phone. "An internal review?" "It's routine," the man assured him, though there was something forced about the way he said it. "Just a compliance check." Daniel forced himself to remain calm. "How long will this review take?" "We're working as quickly as possible." That was not an answer. He ended the call before he could say something he would regret, tossing the phone onto his desk. For the first time, a sliver of doubt took root. A review. Why now? And why hadn't he been informed earlier? Something wasn't right. That evening, he returned to the penthouse, his mood darker than it had been in years. Vivian was waiting for him, draped in one of the many gowns he had bought her, a glass of champagne in hand. "Rough day?" she asked, watching him as he discarded his jacket and loosened his tie. He didn't answer immediately, walking to the bar and pouring himself a drink. "I think I might have a problem," he admitted finally. Vivian stilled. That wasn't something Daniel Hawthorne ever said. She set down her glass, moving toward him. "What kind of problem?" His eyes flickered to hers, searching, calculating. She was loyal to his money. That much he knew. But was she loyal to him? For the first time, he found himself hesitating. "Nothing I can't handle," he said eventually. Vivian's expression didn't change, but he knew she didn't believe him. The following days only deepened his paranoia. More delays, more reviews. And through it all, Eleanor remained exactly the same, graceful, calm, untouchable. If she knew something, she wasn't showing it. But Daniel had built his empire on knowing when a storm was coming. And he could feel it now, just beyond the horizon. Eleanor sat at the long dining table, the flickering candlelight casting shadows along the polished wood. She had always appreciated quiet dinners, the kind where conversation didn't need to be forced, where the clinking of silverware and the rich aroma of carefully prepared meals were enough to fill the space. But tonight, the quiet was different. Heavy, weighted with something unspoken. Across from her, Daniel scrolled through his phone, his brows drawn together in a way that he probably didn't even realize was visible. He had always been so good at masking his emotions, at keeping his carefully crafted exterior intact. But not tonight. Tonight, Eleanor could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight stiffness in the way he held his glass of wine. He hadn't mentioned the banking delays to her, of course. He wouldn't. But she already knew. She had watched his movements closely over the past few days. The hurried phone calls he thought she couldn't hear, the way his patience had thinned at the slightest inconvenience, the sharp glances at his phone whenever it buzzed with a notification. He was unraveling, little by little, and she had barely lifted a finger. She took a slow sip of her wine, placing the glass down gently before meeting his gaze. "You've been distracted lately." Daniel barely looked up from his phone. "Busy week," he murmured, scrolling through whatever meaningless thing he was using as an excuse to avoid conversation. She tilted her head, studying him. "Anything I can help with?" That made him pause for half a second, but then he shook his head, offering the faintest of smiles. "Nothing you need to worry about." She nodded, reaching for her fork, cutting into the seared salmon on her plate. "You know," she said casually, "I had lunch with Marianne today." She mentioned something interesting. He took a sip of his wine, still half distracted. Yeah. Eleanor watched him carefully. She said one of her friends had an issue with her accounts recently. Some kind of internal review? Her bank froze certain transactions while they checked into things. Daniel's glass stilled midair. For a fraction of a second, just the briefest moment, something flickered across his face. Something sharp, something alarmed. It was gone as quickly as it came, but Eleanor had seen it. She had spent years reading people, mastering the art of subtlety, of noticing the things that weren't meant to be noticed. He set his glass down a little too carefully, his smile tight. Sounds like a nightmare. But banks do that sometimes. Probably just protocol. Probably, she agreed, cutting another piece of fish, her expression unreadable. Silence stretched between them for a moment before Daniel cleared his throat, pushing his chair back slightly. I have to make a call, he said, already standing. I'll be right back. Eleanor merely nodded, watching as he disappeared into his office, the door clicking shut behind him. She took another sip of wine, the faintest trace of a smile curving her lips. Inside his office, Daniel paced the room, his phone pressed to his ear. I need an update. He snapped the moment his banker picked up. There was hesitation on the other end. Mr. Hawthorne, I told you, it's a standard review. Don't lie to me, Daniel growled. I've moved money the same way for years. No reviews. No freezes. So why now? The banker hesitated again, which only fueled Daniel's frustration. He could feel control slipping through his fingers, and he hated it. We were notified of an internal compliance alert, the banker finally admitted, lowering his voice as if saying it quietly would soften the blow. I'm not supposed to say this, but it came from within your household. Daniel's breath stilled. What the hell does that mean? The banker hesitated. Your wife, sir. There were adjustments made to the trust fund. She has full oversight now. The words hit him like a fist to the gut. For a moment, all he could do was stand there, gripping the edge of his desk so tightly his knuckles went white. He could hear his pulse pounding in his ears. Eleanor. He ended the call without another word, inhaling deeply, forcing himself to think. Eleanor had never cared about the finances. She had always left that to him. She trusted him. He had made sure of it. So why was she suddenly looking into the accounts? His mind raced through every possibility, every scenario, trying to find a way this wasn't what it seemed. Maybe she had been advised to do it. Maybe her lawyers had suggested an audit, something routine. Or maybe she knew. No, that wasn't possible. He had covered his tracks too well. She wasn't the type to play these games. She wasn't. A quiet knock on the office door made him turn. Eleanor stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, her expression unreadable. Is everything all right? Daniel forced himself to relax, pasting on a smile. Of course. Just some business matters. She stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. You left the table in a hurry. Just had to handle something, he said smoothly, stepping toward her. He had always been good at this, at turning the situation in his favor, at charming his way out of tight corners. He reached for her waist, pulling her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Nothing to worry about. She let him hold her, resting her hands on his chest, her fingers lightly tracing the fabric of his shirt. For a moment, just a moment, he almost believed it. But then she pulled back slightly, looking up at him with those calm, knowing eyes. Are you sure? She murmured. His stomach clenched. Of course, he said again, a little too quickly this time. She studied him for a long moment, then smiled. All right. And just like that, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, the ghost of her touch still lingering on his skin. As soon as she was gone, he exhaled, running a hand through his hair, his pulse still racing. He needed to figure out what was happening. He needed to fix this before it spiraled out of control. But deep down, a cold realization was settling into his bones. The game had shifted, and for the first time in his life, Daniel wasn't sure if he was the one holding all the cards anymore. Daniel had always been a man of instinct. It was what had built his empire, what had allowed him to navigate the treacherous waters of business with precision and dominance. He trusted his gut, relied on his ability to control every situation, to bend circumstances to his will. And yet, for the first time in years, something was gnawing at the edges of his certainty. A quiet, persistent whisper that told him something was wrong. Eleanor was up to something. He could feel it. He had spent the better part of the night locked in his office, staring at his computer screen, combing through financial records, trying to pinpoint exactly where the shift had happened. There had been no explicit notices, no direct alerts, just a subtle tightening of the noose, a slow restriction of his usual movements. The accounts weren't frozen yet, but there were delays, hesitations, barriers that hadn't been there before. He refreshed his banking app for the 10th time, his jaw tightening as the same notification blinked back at him. Transfer pending authorization. His fingers drummed against the mahogany desk, his mind racing through possibilities. If Eleanor was digging into the trust fund, if she had started paying attention to the withdrawals, then he needed to act fast. He needed to secure what he could before she made her next move. But then, another thought slithered its way into his mind, cold and unwelcome. What if she already had? A sharp knock at the door made him tense. He exhaled through his nose, schooling his features before calling out. "Come in." The door creaked open, and Eleanor stepped inside. Her silk robe cinched loosely at her waist, her bare feet silent against the hardwood floor. Her hair was slightly tousled, as if she had just woken up, but her eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, were wide and alert. "Still working?" she murmured, crossing the room with unhurried steps, her gaze flickering to the computer screen. Daniel clicked out of the banking app smoothly, shifting back into his usual facade. "Just handling a few things," she hummed in response, trailing her fingers along the edge of his desk before perching on the armrest of the leather chair across from him. "You've been restless lately," she observed, tilting her head slightly. He smirked, leaning back in his chair, feigning ease. "Have I?" She nodded, studying him like one might observe an unpredictable animal. "You have. And it's not business, is it?" A slow silence stretched between them. Daniel was used to Eleanor's quiet observations, her ability to see more than she should. It had never bothered him before. But now, every word felt like a probe, every glance a deliberate test. He chuckled, shaking his head. "You always do this." "Do what?" "Read into things. Analyze." He reached for his glass of whiskey, swirling the amber liquid before taking a slow sip. "Sometimes things are exactly as they seem." Eleanor's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "And sometimes they're not." His grip tightened on the glass. She stood, stretching lazily before making her way toward the door. "Don't stay up too late," she murmured, pausing just long enough to glance at him over her shoulder. "You have a big day tomorrow." Daniel watched her go, his mind spinning. A big day? The words echoed in his head long after she had disappeared down the hall, long after he had abandoned his glass of whiskey and turned back to the screen, long after he had convinced himself that Eleanor knew nothing. And yet, sleep did not come easily that night. The following morning, he was up before dawn, showered and dressed in a perfectly tailored suit before Eleanor even stepped foot downstairs. She greeted him with a soft smile as she poured herself a cup of coffee, moving with the effortless grace she always carried. "You're up early," she noted. "Meetings," he said, fastening the cufflinks on his sleeve, his voice casual. "Have to finalize some things." Eleanor nodded, adding a splash of cream to her coffee. "I'm sure you do." His eyes flicked to her, narrowing slightly, but she didn't elaborate. Instead, she took a slow sip, watching him over the rim of her mug, her gaze unreadable. He didn't like it. By the time he reached his office, he was already making calls. "I need to move some things around," he told his financial advisor. There was a slight pause. "Move things around." "You heard me." The man cleared his throat. "Sir, with all due respect, there have been complications with your accounts. We're facing some regulatory." Daniel exhaled sharply. "I don't give a damn about regulations. I need this handled." "I understand, but what?" Another pause. Then, carefully, "Your wife has made some changes to the trust, sir. Legal changes. She's been in direct communication with the firm." Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. "Excuse me." "Her legal team filed the paperwork last month. She has full oversight now. Any major withdrawals or transfers require her explicit approval." Daniel went very, very still. "Last month. She had been planning this for weeks." His grip on the phone tightened. "And no one thought to inform me?" There was hesitation. "It was within her rights, sir. And she didn't request for you to be notified." His vision blurred at the edges. "Eleanor." He ended the call, his pulse roaring in his ears. He could fix this. He could find a way around it. He always did. But the sheer audacity of it, The fact that she had done this so quietly, so efficiently, without ever tipping her hand, it enraged him. He grabbed his keys, his movements sharp and precise. He would talk to Eleanor directly. He would fix this. When he arrived home that evening, Eleanor was waiting for him. She sat on the balcony, a glass of wine in hand, her face serene as the evening breeze tousled her hair. "You're home early," she mused without turning around. Daniel stepped forward, the tension in his shoulders coiling like a spring. "We need to talk." She took a slow sip, then finally glanced at him, her expression soft, almost amused. "About what?" He inhaled deeply, forcing himself to keep his composure. "You know exactly what." A beat of silence. Then, setting her glass down, Eleanor leaned back in her chair, crossing one leg over the other, completely at ease. "I suppose I do," she admitted, her lips curving ever so slightly. Daniel's jaw clenched. "You had no right." Her gaze flickered with something dangerous. "I had every right." Another stretch of silence, thick with something neither of them spoke aloud. Then, Eleanor stood, smoothing the fabric of her dress before stepping closer, stopping just inches from him. "You always thought I was naive," she murmured, tilting her head slightly. "That was your first mistake." His pulse thundered. She reached up, brushing an invisible speck of dust from his lapel. "The second was assuming I wouldn't notice." Daniel swallowed hard, his jaw tightening, but Eleanor only smiled, stepping back. "Dinner will be ready soon," she said lightly, turning on her heel and walking away, leaving him standing there, his entire world beginning to fracture beneath his feet. Vivian Cross had never considered herself the kind of woman who waited. She was used to getting what she wanted, when she wanted it, and on her terms. It was a skill she had perfected over the years, a talent that had kept her surrounded by wealth and power without ever having to truly work for it. She had built a life on patience disguised as seduction, on carefully measured smiles, and whispered promises that men fell for every single time. But patience, no matter how skillfully worn, had its limits. And hers was beginning to fray. She paced the length of her penthouse, the silk of her robe brushing against her skin, the moonlight casting shadows against the marble floors. The glass of wine in her hand was untouched, her appetite dulled by frustration. Daniel was late. Again. He had promised he'd be there hours ago, had sent a curt text, "On my way," before disappearing into silence. It wasn't the first time, and if things continued at this rate, it wouldn't be the last. Vivian prided herself on her ability to maintain control. She was never the one who begged, never the one who worried. That was the role of the wives, the oblivious women left at home while their husbands strayed. But Eleanor Hawthorne, despite the elegance and grace she exuded, was proving to be more than just another rich man's wife. She was a problem, a quiet, lingering problem that Vivian could no longer ignore. The click of the penthouse door made her turn sharply. Daniel entered, his jacket slung over one arm, his expression tired and irritated, as if the world itself had conspired against him tonight. He loosened his tie with one hand, ignoring Vivian's narrowed gaze as he walked to the bar and poured himself a drink. "You're late," she said, setting her glass down on the sleek black countertop. Daniel took a long sip of whiskey before answering. "It's been a long day." Vivian studied him. He was tense, distracted, his usual air of absolute control slipping at the edges. That was unusual. He thrived in chaos, fed off the high of maneuvering through difficult situations. But something was different now. She crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. "Let me guess. Eleanor." Daniel's eyes flicked to hers, a warning flashing behind them. "Drop it, Vivian." She scoffed, shaking her head. "Oh, please. You've been off for weeks now. Ever since those bank issues started." His grip on the glass tightened. "I said drop it." Vivian pushed off the counter, stepping closer, her voice dropping to something softer, something sharper. "You told me you'd leave her, Daniel. You promised. And yet, here we are, still sneaking around, still playing the same game." He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "It's complicated." "No," she countered. "It's not. You're either going to leave her, or you're not." He turned away from her, placing his glass down with just a little too much force. "You think this is simple?" Vivian's patience snapped. "Yes, I do. I think you're stalling. I think you like the comfort of having both of us. But I'm not going to sit around and wait for you to make up your mind." Daniel's jaw tightened, the weight of his frustrations pressing down on him. Eleanor was a problem. The trust fund was a problem. His accounts, once a limitless pool of wealth, were being restricted more and more by the day. Vivian pushing him right now was the last thing he needed. He turned, his expression dark. "You need to trust me." Vivian laughed, a hollow sound. "Trust you? Daniel, I know men like you. You say what needs to be said. You make promises you have no intention of keeping, and you keep me waiting just long enough to keep me here." His patience was running thin. "You think I don't want to fix this? You think I want to deal with Eleanor's?" He stopped himself before finishing the sentence, his frustration getting the best of him. Vivian arched an eyebrow. "With Eleanor's what?" He didn't answer. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You're scared, aren't you?" Daniel's head snapped toward her, his expression unreadable. Vivian smirked, shaking her head. "You've never had to fight for anything, have you? Things just come to you. Women, money, power. You take, and you never think about what happens if it's taken from you." His silence was answer enough. Vivian stepped back, crossing her arms. "So what now? You keep feeding me excuses while Eleanor tightens the noose." Daniel exhaled through his nose, his fingers pressing against his temples. "I don't have time for this." "No," Vivian said, her voice sharper. "You don't. So you better figure it out." "Because I don't wait forever, Daniel." A heavy silence fell between them, thick with tension, unspoken threats lingering in the air. Daniel grabbed his jacket, already heading for the door. "I'll call you tomorrow." Vivian's lips curled into a slow smile, but there was nothing warm about it. "Make sure you do." As the door clicked shut behind him, she turned, picking up her glass of wine, swirling the liquid slowly as she stared out over the city. Daniel was slipping. She could feel it. The weight of whatever was happening with Eleanor was dragging him down, making him hesitate, making him weak. And Vivian didn't stay with weak men. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary as he sped through the empty streets, his mind a chaotic mess. He had handled difficult situations before. He had maneuvered through scandals, dodged financial disasters, played people like pieces on a chessboard. But this was different. Eleanor wasn't just another woman to outmaneuver. She was his wife, the one person he had underestimated, the one person he should have been watching more closely. And now, she had control. She had been watching him, moving against him. A part of him wanted to believe he could fix this, that he could talk his way back into control. But deep down, beneath the frustration and the denial, he knew Eleanor wasn't the type to let go of something once she had it. And she had him exactly where she wanted him. Daniel awoke to a sensation he wasn't familiar with, uncertainty. It clung to him, a quiet, creeping thing that slithered through the edges of his mind, whispering that something was wrong. He sat up in bed, rubbing a hand down his face, trying to shake off the lingering exhaustion from a night spent tossing and turning. The city lights outside his bedroom window cast long, shifting shadows across the walls, mirroring the unease settling deep in his chest. The clock read 6:43 a.m., and his phone buzzed on the nightstand, a sharp, insistent vibration that immediately put him on edge. He reached for it, unlocking the screen with practiced ease, but the moment his eyes landed on the notification, his stomach twisted. Transfer declined. Daniel sat perfectly still. He blinked once, then twice, as if the words on the screen might rearrange themselves into something less catastrophic. He tapped the notification, his pulse beginning to thrum, bringing up his banking app with a precision that had been drilled into him over years of high-stakes financial maneuvers. The balance was unchanged. No transfer had been made. His jaw tightened as he tried again, this time initiating a different transaction, a smaller amount, something that should have gone through instantly. Error. Authorization required. The blood in his veins ran cold. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, standing abruptly, already dialing his banker. His free hand ran through his hair, his breathing measured but forced. It rang twice before a cautious voice answered. "Mr. Hawthorne, what the hell is going on?" Daniel snapped, barely containing the anger coiled in his chest. There was a pause on the other end, and that alone told him everything he needed to know. I was just about to call you," the banker said, his voice tight with unease. "There's been an issue with your accounts." Daniel's fingers clenched around his phone. "Be specific." "Your assets have been frozen." The words hit like a gunshot. Daniel inhaled sharply, his grip tightening, his mind already running through possibilities. Frozen. His voice was dangerously low now. Explain. Now. Another pause. Then the banker cleared his throat. It was an internal request, sir. Filed through the oversight clause in the trust fund agreement. Daniel's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. What oversight clause? The one your wife initiated. For a moment, everything inside him stilled. Eleanor. She had done this. His pulse pounded against his temples, a slow, building rage taking root. He had known she was up to something, had felt the shift in the air between them. But this was beyond anything he had expected. How long? He demanded. The banker hesitated. Indefinitely, sir. Daniel exhaled through his nose, forcing himself to stay calm, to think. And who approved this? There was no hesitation this time. Mrs. Hawthorne has full control. The line went dead in Daniel's mind. The world around him seemed to slow, the weight of those words pressing down on his chest like a vice. His vision tunneled, focusing on nothing but the confirmation of his worst fear. Eleanor wasn't just watching him. She had taken action. She had cut him off. He ended the call without another word, already moving. His movements were sharp, mechanical, his mind calculating the next step even as fury pulsed beneath his skin. He had to get ahead of this. He had to regain control. Dressing quickly, he left the bedroom, his shoes echoing against the marble floors of the estate as he moved through the house with purpose. The staff avoided his gaze as he passed, sensing the tension radiating off him in waves. He barely noticed them. His focus was singular now. Eleanor was in the sunroom, bathed in soft morning light, a cup of tea cradled between her delicate fingers. She was the picture of composure, serene, untouched by the chaos she had just unleashed. Daniel stopped in the doorway, watching her for a moment. She knew he was there. He could tell by the slight shift in her posture, by the way her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You're up early," she said, her voice smooth as silk. He took a step closer, his jaw tight. "Cut the act." Eleanor finally looked up, her expression unreadable. "Act." Daniel's patience snapped. "Don't play games with me, Eleanor. What the hell did you do?" She set her cup down gently, tilting her head. "You're going to have to be more specific." He stalked forward, stopping just short of her chair, his hands braced against the glass table. "My accounts. The money. You froze them." She didn't even blink. "Yes." A muscle in his jaw twitched. He had been prepared for denial, for some carefully crafted excuse. He had not been prepared for her to admit it so easily. He exhaled sharply, straightening. "You think this is going to stop me?" Eleanor finally stood, smoothing the fabric of her robe, her movements unhurried. "I think," she said softly, "that you underestimated me." His chest rose and fell in sharp, measured breaths. "Eleanor, you thought I wouldn't notice," she continued, stepping closer, her voice deceptively gentle. "You thought I was naive, that I didn't pay attention to the numbers, to the bank statements, to the transfers you thought you were hiding so well." Daniel swallowed hard. "You were wrong." Silence stretched between them, thick with something unspoken, something heavy. Finally, Eleanor exhaled, shaking her head slightly. "I could have confronted you earlier. Could have asked you outright. But I wanted to see how far you'd go. I wanted to know just how little you thought of me." Her words cut deeper than he expected. "You don't understand," he ground out. "Oh, I understand perfectly," she said, her gaze piercing. "I understand that you spent months lying to my face, withdrawing money to fund your mistress's lifestyle, treating me like a fool while you played your little game. I understand that you thought I was just another asset, just another part of your empire to manipulate." Daniel took a step back, suddenly unsteady. "I understand," she continued, "that you don't deserve to control a single cent of my money." His heart pounded against his ribs, his mind scrambling for a way out, a counterattack, something to regain his footing. "You're making a mistake." Eleanor smiled then, and it was a cold, beautiful thing. "No, Daniel," she murmured, turning away. "You did." And with that, she walked past him, leaving him standing in the ruins of his carefully constructed life, the walls closing in, the ground crumbling beneath his feet. For the first time in his life, Daniel Hawthorne had lost control. Daniel had spent his life mastering control. Every deal, every calculated risk, every carefully chosen word had been part of his strategy, his ability to bend the world to his will. But as he stood alone in the sunroom, the echo of Eleanor's footsteps still lingering in the air. He felt something unfamiliar clawing at his insides. Panic. Cold, unrelenting panic. This wasn't just a setback. This was a direct, calculated move, one he had never seen coming. Eleanor hadn't confronted him in anger, hadn't thrown accusations or made a dramatic scene. She had moved in silence, dismantling everything he had taken for granted, every financial safety net he thought was impenetrable. His accounts were frozen. His money, her money, was out of reach. The mistress he had lavished gifts upon, the lifestyle he had promised her, was now teetering on the edge of collapse. And worst of all, Eleanor wasn't finished. He could feel it in her eyes, in the quiet way she had delivered her final words. No, this wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Daniel stormed out of the sunroom, his movements sharp and fueled by pure adrenaline. He grabbed his car keys from the hallway table, ignoring the wary glances from the household staff as he shoved open the front door and stepped out into the crisp morning air. He needed to fix this. He needed to get to Vivian before she heard about what had happened. Because if there was one thing Daniel knew, it was that Vivian Cross didn't tolerate weakness. And right now, he was the weakest he had ever been. The drive to her penthouse was a blur, the city flashing past him in streaks of light and movement. His mind raced with contingency plans, ways to maneuver his way back into control, but every path led to a dead end. His lawyers would need time to untangle the mess Eleanor had created, time he didn't have. He needed access to money now, and the only way to do that was to keep Vivian on his side. He pulled into the underground parking garage, killing the engine before stepping out, his heart hammering against his ribs. He took the private elevator up to her floor, swallowing the bitterness in his throat as he straightened his tie. He needed to play this carefully, but as the doors slid open and he stepped into the lavish penthouse he had paid for, he knew something was wrong. The air was different. The lights were dimmed, the scent of her signature perfume lingering faintly in the air. But there was no music playing, no greeting from the woman who usually threw herself into his arms the moment he walked through the door. And then he saw them, her suitcases neatly lined up by the entrance. A slow, creeping dread coiled around his spine. Vivian emerged from the bedroom a moment later, her phone pressed to her ear, her expression unreadable as she murmured something under her breath before ending the call. She was already dressed to leave, her designer coat draped effortlessly over her shoulders, her manicured fingers adjusting the strap of her purse. She glanced at him, tilting her head slightly. "You look like hell." Daniel exhaled sharply. "Vivian, what the hell is this?" She smirked, stepping closer, the sharp click of her heels against the marble floor echoing in the space between them. "I'm leaving," she said simply. His jaw tightened. "Like hell you are." Vivian arched an eyebrow. "Oh, Daniel," she sighed, reaching for a glass of champagne she had left on the counter. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out?" His pulse pounded. She took a slow sip, savoring it, before setting the glass down. "Your accounts are frozen. Your money's gone. You have nothing." Daniel took a step closer, lowering his voice. "This isn't permanent. I can fix it." Vivian laughed, a soft, melodic sound, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm sure you think you can. But the reality? You're screwed." Daniel's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You said you wanted a life with me. A future. That hasn't changed." She shook her head, her expression pitying. "I wanted a future with Daniel Hawthorne, the untouchable millionaire. Not Daniel Hawthorne, the man whose wife just outplayed him." His jaw locked. "You're giving up that easily?" Vivian sighed, setting her glass aside. "Daniel, don't be stupid. I don't give up. I make smart decisions." She gestured toward the suitcases. "And leaving you? That's the smartest one I've made in years." His chest burned with something dangerously close to desperation. "I built this life for you." Vivian's lips curled into a slow, almost amused smile. "No, sweetheart. Eleanor built it. You just stole from it." Daniel's nostrils flared. Don't what? Don't say it out loud." She shrugged. "It's true, and you know it." He turned away, inhaling sharply, trying to keep his temper in check. "This isn't over." Vivian picked up her coat from the couch, draping it over her arm. "For me, it is." He turned back to face her, his eyes dark, sharp, cutting. But Vivian didn't flinch. She reached out, smoothing the lapel of his jacket, her voice softer now, almost condescending. You should have left her when you had the chance, she murmured. But you got greedy. Daniel grabbed her wrist, his grip firm but not painful. His mind was racing, trying to find a way to turn this around, to keep her from walking out that door. But Vivian only smirked. You don't scare me, she whispered. Slowly, she pulled her wrist free, stepping back. She reached into her purse, pulling out an envelope, and placed it on the counter. He frowned. What's that? Vivian smirked. The lease to this place. Daniel stiffened. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping. You didn't think I'd let you have this, did you? A cold realization settled in his chest. Vivian had been planning this. She had known, long before this moment, that she would leave him. And now, she wasn't just walking away. She was taking everything she could on her way out. She picked up her suitcase, glancing at him one last time. Goodbye, Daniel. And just like that, she walked out the door. Daniel stood there, frozen, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. He had lost control. He had lost his money. And now, he had lost the woman he had risked everything for. He turned to the envelope, flipping it open with shaking fingers. The lease was in her name. Everything was in her name. He had nothing. For the first time in his life, Daniel Hawthorne was utterly, completely alone. Daniel Hawthorne had never believed in luck. He had built his empire on precision, control, and an unwavering belief that nothing was beyond his reach if he pushed hard enough. Success wasn't given, it was taken. And he had taken everything. Money, power, loyalty, without hesitation. But standing in his office now, staring at the glowing city skyline that had once felt like his kingdom, he realized for the first time in his life that he had nothing left to take. Because everything he had once controlled was slipping through his fingers like sand, and no amount of force could stop it. The silence in the room was deafening. His phone sat dark on his desk, no incoming calls, no desperate apologies from those who had once depended on him, no messages from investors eager to line his pockets. The absence of noise was worse than any confrontation. The world had moved on, and he was being left behind. He reached for his whiskey glass, but it was empty. That was becoming a theme lately. Empty glasses, empty accounts, empty promises he had made to himself that he would fix this before it was too late. But it was already too late, wasn't it? His business was in shambles. His employees hadn't been paid. The trust fund, the bottomless pit of wealth he had always believed he could manipulate, was locked. Eleanor had shut the door and thrown away the key, and he hadn't even seen it coming. His jaw clenched as he picked up his phone, scrolling through his recent calls. The last conversation with his banker still echoed in his head. I'm sorry, Mr. Hawthorne, but your access has been revoked. Your wife made it legally binding. There's nothing we can do. Nothing. That word made him sick. He gritted his teeth, dialing a number he had been avoiding all day. His attorney, Robert Langley, answered on the second ring, his voice clipped and professional as always. Daniel, he greeted, but there was an edge of hesitation. That was new. Daniel didn't waste time. Tell me you've found a way around it. A sigh came through the line. Daniel, I told you before, Eleanor executed this flawlessly. The trust fund is untouchable. Even if you took this to court, it would take months, possibly years, to challenge it. And considering the way your finances look right now, you don't have that kind of time. Daniel squeezed his eyes shut, his free hand clenching into a fist. So you're telling me my own wife, the woman I paid for, provided for, gave everything to, just took my money, my company, my goddamn life, and there's nothing I can do about it? There was a long pause. That's exactly what I'm telling you. Daniel slammed his glass down on the desk, his chest rising and falling in short, angry breaths. I have assets, he snapped. Properties. Investments. Pull from those. Those are all tied up in the corporate holdings, Langley reminded him. And guess what? Eleanor controls those too. Your name may be on some of the deeds, but the liquidity, your ability to sell, transfer, or leverage any of them, is restricted. The board has already started reviewing alternative leadership, and the media is sniffing around. You don't just have a financial problem, Daniel. You have a credibility problem. Daniel gritted his teeth, his pulse pounding. I am the company. You were the company, Langley corrected. Eleanor made sure that's no longer the case. Daniel ended the call without another word, gripping the edge of his desk so tightly his knuckles turned white. His breathing was uneven, his mind racing through options that no longer existed. He had been outplayed. He had spent years thinking he was the one pulling the strings, that Eleanor was just another asset in his portfolio. Predictable, controllable, devoted. He had mistaken her silence for ignorance, her patience for passivity. But she had been waiting, watching, letting him dig his own grave while she stood back and took notes. And now she had buried him in it. A knock at the office door made him snap his head up. Caroline, his assistant, stepped in, her expression hesitant. She had been with him for years, had seen him at his highest, had witnessed the reckless confidence that had once made him unstoppable. But tonight, there was something different in her eyes. Pity. He hated that. What? He snapped. Caroline hesitated before stepping forward, placing a neatly folded envelope on his desk. The board called an emergency meeting, she said carefully. They're requesting your presence. Daniel scoffed, rubbing a hand down his face. They're requesting it. Caroline didn't blink. They're voting on your position as CEO. Silence stretched between them. Daniel stared at her, unblinking. He had always known the board was a necessary evil. Men and women who profited off his leadership but would turn on him the second he stopped being valuable. But he had never once imagined they would have the audacity to try and remove him. Not him. His laugh was humorless. Let me guess. Eleanor's fingerprints are all over this, too. Caroline didn't answer. She didn't have to. Daniel grabbed the envelope, tearing it open. The formal letter inside was as cold and impersonal as the situation itself. Mr. Hawthorne, due to recent financial instability and concerns regarding corporate leadership, the board of directors has called for an emergency vote regarding your continued role as chief executive officer of Hawthorne Holdings. His own company, the empire he had built, the power he had wielded so effortlessly for years, now reduced to a single piece of paper outlining his removal. Daniel felt his pulse roaring in his ears. He wasn't just losing control. He had already lost it. With slow, deliberate movements, he stood, buttoning his suit jacket. If they thought they could strip him of everything he had built, they were going to have to look him in the eye while they did it. He wasn't going to slink away into the shadows. He wasn't going to let her, see him crumble. No, he was going to walk into that boardroom and fight like hell. Even if it was already too late. The boardroom was a battlefield. Daniel could feel it the second he stepped inside. The air was thick with tension, the kind that came before an execution. The men and women seated at the long glass table barely glanced at him, their faces neutral, their expressions carefully controlled. No one wanted to be the first to acknowledge that the king was about to be dethroned. Daniel adjusted his cufflinks, taking his time as he walked to the head of the table, where he had sat for years, where his presence had once been unquestioned. He could feel their eyes shifting, their discomfort evident in the way some of them tapped their fingers against their pens or cleared their throats unnecessarily. He smirked. Cowards. Robert Langley was already seated, his expression unreadable, but Daniel knew his lawyer well enough to recognize when he was fighting a battle he had already lost. Across the table, several board members exchanged quick glances, silent conversations happening in the subtle tilt of a head, the flicker of an eye. And then there was Eleanor. She sat at the far end, composed as ever, her dark hair pulled back in an elegant twist, her gaze steady. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't smug. She was simply there, unmoved, untouched by the chaos Daniel had created for himself. His chest burned. Howard Sinclair, the chairman of the board, cleared his throat. Mr. Hawthorne, he began, his voice perfectly diplomatic. We appreciate you taking the time to meet with us on such short notice. Daniel gave a humorless chuckle as he pulled out his chair and sank into it. Oh, don't insult me, Howard. We all know why we're here. Sinclair didn't flinch. He was good at this, keeping things civil, making it seem like this was just another business decision and not the public execution of the man who had built the company they now controlled. We'll keep this brief, Sinclair continued. Due to recent financial complications and the instability surrounding the company's leadership, we've been forced to reassess the long-term viability of our executive structure. Daniel leaned back, feigning ease. Cut the bullshit, Howard. His voice was smooth, but the underlying steel was impossible to miss. You're here to vote me out. A flicker of discomfort passed through the board. Sinclair exhaled slowly. We're here to discuss what's best for the company. Daniel let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head. The company? You mean the same company I built? The one I made into what it is today? You really think you can just remove me and everything will magically be fine? Eleanor finally spoke. Actually, she said smoothly, that's exactly what we think. Daniel's gaze snapped to hers, and the rage simmering beneath his skin erupted into something more dangerous. She wasn't playing a part. She wasn't pretending to be the supportive wife anymore. She was meeting him head-on, unshaken, unwavering. He exhaled through his nose, a sharp breath. You orchestrated this. Eleanor tilted her head slightly. I protected what was mine. His pulse pounded. What was yours? His laugh was hollow, sharp. Every cent of that company, every deal, every acquisition, every expansion, was mine. Eleanor remained poised. And yet, here we are. Silence stretched between them. Sinclair shifted in his seat. The board has already voted, Daniel. Daniel's fingers curled into fists under the table. You didn't even let me defend myself. Sinclair hesitated. It wasn't unanimous. Daniel's gaze flickered to Eleanor. Of course it wasn't. She had been on the board for years. Technically, she had never interfered, never stepped in where she wasn't wanted. She had played the role of the uninterested spouse, too refined to get involved in business affairs. But now, he saw it clearly. She had always been watching, waiting for the moment when she would no longer have to let him believe he was the one in control. His breathing slowed as realization settled over him. This wasn't just about the affair. This wasn't about Vivian, or the money, or the deception. This was about power. And Eleanor had taken it back. Langley shifted beside him, lowering his voice. Daniel, he warned, we should. Daniel stood abruptly, pushing his chair back with enough force that it scraped against the polished floor. He wasn't going to sit here and let them take everything from him like he was some disgraced politician quietly resigning in shame. He straightened his jacket, letting the silence hang in the room. His eyes swept over the board, lingering on those who had once praised him, once aligned themselves with him for the benefits his name provided. None of them met his gaze now. Enjoy your little coup, he said coolly, his voice measured, void of emotion. But don't think for a second that this company will survive without me. He turned on his heel, not waiting for a response. As he reached the door, Eleanor's voice cut through the quiet. Oh, Daniel. He paused, clenching his jaw before looking back. Eleanor smiled, soft, almost pitying. Your severance package has been arranged. A flicker of something unfamiliar ran down his spine. Fear. She was done with him. Completely. Utterly. Irrevocably. Daniel turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing down the corridor, his entire world crumbling behind him. He didn't remember driving. Didn't remember getting back to the estate. The place was eerily silent when he stepped inside, the weight of what had just happened pressing against his chest like a steel bar. His hands trembled as he loosened his tie, as he walked into the vast living room that now felt emptier than ever. He poured himself a drink, but for the first time, the burn of whiskey didn't bring him any comfort. Eleanor had won. He sank onto the couch, staring at nothing, his mind a whirlwind of everything he had lost in the span of weeks. His company, his money, his mistress, his control, his wife. The realization hit him harder than anything else. Because Eleanor wasn't just walking away. She was walking away with everything. And he had no one to blame but himself. The estate was quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful, but empty. Hollow. Daniel sat in his study, the same study where he had once signed million-dollar deals, where he had once dictated the direction of entire industries with a single phone call. Now, his phone didn't ring. His inbox, once overflowing with urgent messages and invitations to elite events, was a wasteland of irrelevance. The people who had once begged for his attention, who had fought for his time, had disappeared like smoke in the wind. He swirled the whiskey in his glass, watching the amber liquid catch the dim light of the fireplace. The drink had once been a comfort, a habit tied to power and control. Now, it was just another reminder of what had been stripped from him. His grip tightened around the glass as he stared at the cold fireplace, the embers long dead, much like his carefully crafted world. Eleanor hadn't just taken his money. She had taken his place. The board had rallied around her, seeing her as the steady hand that would guide the company forward. Investors, once loyal to him, now whispered about her brilliance, about how they should have seen it before. She wasn't just the wife in the background anymore. She was the face of Hawthorne Holdings. And she had left him with nothing. He exhaled slowly, setting the glass down. He could fix this. He would fix this. He had built himself once before, and he could do it again. At least, that's what he told himself. But the truth gnawed at him, sharp and unrelenting. He had spent years crafting his image, living as if he were untouchable, believing in his own invincibility. But power built on arrogance was fragile. He had ignored the warning signs, dismissed the small shifts in Eleanor's behavior, convinced himself that she was weak, naive, blind to his betrayals. He had underestimated her. And now, he was paying the price. His phone buzzed against the desk, shattering the silence. For a moment, he didn't move. No one called him anymore. Not unless they wanted something, and right now, he had nothing left to give. Still, he reached for it, his pulse quickening when he saw the name on the screen. Eleanor. His fingers hovered over the answer button. A part of him wanted to ignore it, to hold on to his pride, to pretend he didn't care. But another part of him, the part that knew she was the only person who had ever truly understood him, wanted to hear her voice. He exhaled sharply, pressing the button. Eleanor. There was a pause on the other end. Then, her voice, calm, steady, the same as it had always been. Daniel. Silence stretched between them. He could hear the faint hum of the city behind her, the distant sound of a car passing. She was somewhere outside, somewhere new, somewhere without him. What do you want? He asked, his voice rougher than he intended. Eleanor sighed softly. I wanted to make sure you were all right. Daniel laughed, though there was no humor in it. That's rich. I'm serious, she said quietly. I never wanted to destroy you, Daniel. His grip on the phone tightened. You have a funny way of showing it. You did this to yourself. The words cut deeper than he expected. He ran a hand down his face, inhaling sharply. Is this what you called for? To remind me how badly I lost. Eleanor didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, almost regretful. No, I just thought you should know that I've finalized everything. A cold weight settled in his chest. The divorce? Yes. He nodded slowly, though she couldn't see him. He had known it was coming, had expected it. But hearing the finality in her voice made it real in a way it hadn't been before. She was gone, and there was nothing he could do to change that. There's a settlement, she continued. You won't be left with nothing, Daniel. He scoffed. How generous. I wasn't trying to punish you, she said, and for the first time, he heard something raw in her tone. I just wanted to protect what was mine. Silence stretched between them again. He wanted to say something, to ask her if she had ever loved him, if any of it had been real. But he already knew the answer. Of course she had. That was what made this hurt so much. Finally, she spoke again. Goodbye, Daniel. And then the line went dead. He sat there, staring at the phone in his hands, the finality of it settling into his bones. She was gone. His company was gone. His power was gone. For the first time in his life, he had nothing. And for the first time in his life, he didn't know what to do next. Eleanor stepped onto the balcony of her new apartment, the city sprawling beneath her, alive and humming with possibility. The wind tugged at the loose waves of her hair as she wrapped her hands around her cup of tea, exhaling slowly. It was over. She had spent years waiting for this moment, for the day she would finally be free. And yet, now that it had arrived, she felt lighter. She wasn't bitter. She wasn't angry. She was just done. Daniel had made his choices. He had underestimated her, betrayed her, spent years believing she would never fight back. But she had. And now, she was finally living life on her own terms. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She turned, setting her cup down as she walked to the entrance, pulling it open to reveal Marianne, her oldest friend, standing there with a knowing smile. You look good, Marianne said, stepping inside. Eleanor smirked. I feel good. Marianne sat on the couch, crossing her legs. So what's next? Eleanor exhaled, running a hand through her hair. I don't know. And for the first time in a long time. I don't need to. She sank into the chair opposite her friend, a slow smile spreading across her lips. For the first time in years, she was truly free.